Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half. Shall we? Today's first terrifying experience. I took a good friend and colleague to lunch a couple weeks ago. A few minutes into our conversation, I began telling him about a project that I had been managing in a remote area of central and eastern Utah called the Book Cliffs. This is a large geographical region with almost no full-time human inhabitants. The area is mostly a semi-arid to arid plateau, crisscrossed by deep canyons, but there are some moderately tall mountains, 8,000 to 9,000 feet, covered by a fairly expansive pinyon pine, spruce, and even aspen forests. My friend is one of the most respected and senior geologists in the state of Utah. He's a very disciplined scientist and researcher, and an incredibly logical thinker. He's an amazing guy, but there is not a single particle of superstition or irrationality in his body. You might imagine my surprise then when instead of asking me about the details of the project, he asks, "Have you seen anything strange out there yet?" I asked him what he meant by strange and expected him to say something like a gem-bearing pegmatites or a fully articulated elasmosaurus remain. Instead, he says, like Bigfoot or UFOs. I laugh out loud. I was positive he was joking. This guy is famous in the local geology community for his totally dry sense of humor. I was sure he was yanking my chain. I expected him to eventually crack a smile, but he didn't. He just sat there stone-faced. Then, after a few moments of what appeared to be serious hesitation, he began telling me an experience that I would have known as complete fiction had it been told by just about any other person I have ever known. His experience took place when he was 16 years old. His father, a prominent local geologist, had won a small contract to map and explore a fairly large tract of wilderness within the Book Cliff area. Naturally, my friend was conscripted as free, or nearly free, labor to help his dad and his uncle complete the project over the course of what they assumed would be an entire summer. As the youngest, fittest member of the troop, my friend was often told to hike up and down ridges, into and out of deep boxed canyons, and over and around mountains, all with a large surveyor's stick in one hand and a heavy 1960s vintage Army surplus walkie-talkie in the other, so that his father and uncle could record elevations at key points in topography. He often found himself bushwhacking through thick juniper, pinyon pine, and aspen, several miles off of any trail, hundreds of yards away from his dad and uncle. He said he felt like someone or something was around nearly all of the time, but just out of sight. A few days into the job, my friend and his little group returned to their camp at the end of the day to find it had been totally ransacked. They all assumed it had been done by bear, tidied up, and thought very little more about it. The next day, my friend was told to bushwhack to the bottom of a deep, wooded ravine, with his dad and uncle remaining on top. He stood in the opening of the base of the ravine, holding his surveyor's stick for measurement, when he heard something large making its way through the timber somewhere downhill from him. He looked a couple hundred yards down the ravine and saw what looked at the distance like A big bearded man wearing a brown buckskin trouser and buckskin shirt, the kind with long leather strings hanging from the arms and legs, making his way through the trees away from him. He watched the man for a moment, but had to take his eyes off of him for a few minutes in order to concentrate on his job. When he had a moment to look towards the man again, he had disappeared. When he got to the top of the ravine again, my friend asked his dad and uncle if they had seen the man. They had not, but they claimed to have heard something move through the timber and brush near the bottom of the ravine as my friend began hiking. Of course, both of the older men seemed totally unconcerned. My friend, however, was totally creeped out by the idea of some weird dude wandering around this place, as remote as Book Cliffs, on foot, dressed in head to toe of buckskin. They went back to their camp that night and were awoken by howling and sticks being thrown at their tent. They fired a few shots into the air, and whatever it was stopped and appeared to flee on foot. A couple of weeks went by without any incident. Then one morning, my friend found himself hiking up the side of the mountain in a fairly dense pine stand. As he approached the summit, he heard something crash through the trees in front of him. He assumed it was probably a deer or an elk, so he kept going without caution. As he broke out of the stand, he saw a large man moving quickly up the side of the mountain, about 100 yards ahead of him. At first glance, he thought it was the same man he had seen wearing that brown buckskin. At closer range, though, he could see that it was not buckskin with strings hanging from its arms and legs. It was long brown hair. He said he couldn't believe his eyes, and that he might not, to this day, had his dad's voice not crackled over the old walkie-talkie, telling him to head back the way he had come, that they had seen it as well. Needless to say, he didn't need to be asked twice. They were there in the Book Cliffs for another couple of months, but never saw the man or creature again. He's been back to the area countless times, hoping in vain to spot whatever it was again. He said that in addition to his Bigfoot sightings, they also saw strange white orbs at night. He said that they would float up and down the high ridges for hours at a time, but none of them ever came closer than a few 100 yards. He says he has seen this several times since. In any event, I thought it was a very strange thing to hear from such a reliable and believable character. Today's second encounter. This event took place in 1993 in Limrock, Alabama. There were, I believe, 6 of us in our group. Cave entrances in the southeast are usually formed by contact between the sandstone cap and the limestone layer beneath it. So we normally hike in from the bottom of the mountain, then contour around the hillsides at the sandstone-limestone contact until we reach the cave. On this particular trip, the cove was fairly remote, and there was not good access to the hillside from the bottom, so we had gone in from the top, leaving our trucks off a road on the ridgeline. We'd only just begun contouring around the hillside when we found 2 oddities. A sapling, 9 inches in circumference, that was broken 6 feet up the trunk. The top part of the sapling had been twisted around 360 degrees, and the top was pointing downhill. The break was so fresh the wood was greenish and looked wet with sap. About 10 feet directly uphill was a little teepee, about 14 inches tall, made out of sticks. So many sticks had been used that the walls were nearly solid. We stopped and considered these oddities for a bit. Opinions of their origin ranged from a Bigfoot, did it, my opinion, to a crazy wind vortex that didn't move anything else near the sapling, including the leaves beneath it, and maybe a little kid was miles from his nearest home and decided to make a doll-sized teepee in the woods. We also noticed that there was large areas in which every sapling and bush was arched over, with the arches all pointing downhill. This is also associated with Bigfoot, but there were so many of them that I suspect it was something more along the lines of wind and ice, or a really, really obsessive compulsive Bigfoot. We hiked, we began to hear wood knocking pacing us. If you've ever heard it, it sounds like an axe hitting a tree. It was always two knocks, always about 100 feet uphill from us. About every 5 minutes, we'd hear a crack, crash, and thump of a tree falling just on the other side of the ridgeline, always directly uphill from us. It's not uncommon for us to hear the sound of wood knocking, always two above us sometimes. On other trips, three knocks would answer, the two from across the cove or down the hillside. The tree crashing pacing us when we hike to caves. I remember once hearing it on 3 different hillsides in one weekend. It's always directly uphill from us, keeping pace with us. Anyway, as I said, we heard it pretty frequently, so as always, we ignored it and continued hiking. All was fine until one of the guys in the group shoved over a dead, rotten tree stump about 8 feet tall. Within seconds of the dead tree hitting the ground, it sounded like all hell breaking loose above us on the hillside as trees started falling one after another. For the next 5 minutes, it was continuous crack, crash, boom, crack, crash, boom. We stood there stunned. Even the Bigfoot non-believers had fear in their eyes, and we nervously acknowledged to one another that we had seriously ticked something off up there. We decided we had better get moving, and we hiked at a much more rapid pace to the cave. For the rest of the hike, we were pelted with dirt and pebbles and occasionally smallish rocks. The cave had a pit entrance, and I had never been so worried that something was going to mess with our ropes. Upon exiting the cave 5 hours later, we found our ropes and gear had been left outside the cave untouched. We didn't hear anything unusual on the hike back to the trucks. But then, we never hear this stuff hiking back to the vehicles. We only hear it hiking to the caves. I think the knocking is a sentinel signaling to the other Bigfoot the location of strangers. The tree crashing is almost certainly a threat display. I've often wondered why we hear the knocking and tree crashing so often on caving trips and rarely on other types of hikes. I suspect part of it is that we are not armed, so they don't feel they need to hide as completely. Also, my group always hiked unusually fast, and a group of people with ropes and packs marching purposely through their territory might be a cause to alert the rest of their group. The knocking always comes from above us on the hillside, and I think it makes them cranky if we surprise them by hiking in from above. In both this incident and the one where something threw large rocks at us and followed us bellowing into the cave, we had hiked in from above instead of hiking up the mountain from the bottom. Today's third experience. I know this is going to sound crazy. It was maybe 2016. I remember being in summer, and the trees and brush were still full and lush. My wife and I live on 12 acres of land in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. The land was mostly wooded, with maybe 3 acres around our home cleared out, with the exception of a random spaced tree. 2 acres in the front yard and about an acre in the back. The house was built in 1969. And the state of the home was original to that year, right down to the shag carpet. We originally moved in 2014, and over the years living there, we gradually worked on remodeling when we had extra time and money. The land had 2 small barns on the property we turned into chicken coops. We also decided to add 1 sheep. The home itself has always had an unsettling feeling. The basement had a dark, evil feeling with a freezer full of animal carcasses and gallon bucket full of frozen blood that was there when we moved in, but that's another story of its own. So over the span of living there, we had problems keeping our chickens alive. We couldn't find how something would be getting in. One day we get home from grocery shopping in the early afternoon and find all of our chickens dead and spread across the backyard. This did not make any sense. We had that heavy-duty hardware cloth wire caging that was torn like something crawled through it. We were concerned and we weren't sure what to do. After all, we had the sheep to worry about as well now. I began setting out at night at different times of the day when I had time to do so. I thought maybe I could hunt whatever it was that was killing our animals, but nothing ever showed up. We kept a close eye on our sheep the best we could, making sure he was well protected. That was until one random morning we went out to feed him and found him out of his stable lying there in the backyard not moving. We still don't know how he could have gotten out. He had no marks or explanation for what happened to him. The only thing that came to mind was a fear-induced heart attack. Like I said, it was summertime. I had the windows open because the ACs were not working very well on the second floor, and I was trying to get a breeze throughout the house. My wife was at work. Meanwhile, I'm working on putting our laundry away in the upstairs bedroom. I began hearing this deep growling sound and a slight higher pitch growl sound with it. I couldn't tell what it was, so I stuck my head out of the window to listen better. I could hear coming from the woods on the right side, the growl slightly getting louder and slowly getting closer to being in view. As the sound drew near, my heart began to sink. I felt dread and fear. I was scared, but I was not sure why. That was until it came into the clearing. There it was. This giant werewolf was walking across the front yard. It was walking on all fours. It had a giant canine head, a large humped back, a large bushy tail, and its fur was thick on its chest and back and thinned on its legs. Its joints bent like a human's. As it walked, its back legs bent like our knees do, and its front legs bent like our elbows do. As it was walking into the front yard, I was able to measure it up by walking past a tree. It was at least 5 feet, standing on all fours to the shoulder, so I imagine this thing would have been 7 to 8 feet tall on its hind legs. The slightly higher pitched sound was coming from behind it. Following behind it was an identical pup. I was in such shock I could not move, frozen in what I was witnessing. I didn't even think to photograph it. I guess at that moment, I didn't want to miss anything. It carried on across the front yard, going deeper into the woods. I told my wife about it and never saw it again after that day. Also, we never went outside without protection after that. We ended up moving in 2018. All right, that was today's second half. A little short, but I'm kind of tired today. I did get an email back from the gentleman whose encounter I shared today, and I'm hoping that he and I can get a time and date together to where we can have him come on and share his experiences with these dogmen. Looking forward to hearing the rest, and I'm looking forward to hearing the experience in his voice. I'm still waiting on a text back from the lady who I shared her experience with out in the Black Hills. A very intense one where a dogman, juvenile dogman, saved her from some sort of demonic werewolf-like dogman. I'm not really sure if it even was a werewolf, the way she described it. It didn't have a tail, but it was like nothing I had ever heard a werewolf looking like. It was very similar to what I saw. Some people I saw in the comments say demon, but I don't know. I don't, with these other things that we're seeing, I'll lean toward demon on those. But with Dogman and Bigfoot, I just can't, because they've been here longer than we have written history, I bet. There is spoken word of them crossing, the land bridge between Russia and Alaska. So I just can't buy into that whole dogmen are demonic thing. I believe some are when they come through these rift portals. I believe that's where the end will come. But yeah, whatever this lady saw was very, very evil. Maybe that came from a portal. And these 2 dogmen or 3 dogmen were not there to save her, but kind of fed up with its, being in their territory and didn't want this person to die, recognizing that she was the one that saved the juvenile back in the day. So hopefully I can get her to come back and talk with me. I know she's fearful of coming on, just because she doesn't want, repercussions, someone recognizing her voice or whatnot. So, but I don't know. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the second half. And with that, I want to thank you all, and may the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.